Wow, that's actually really interesting, because you think immediately of things like logos and names and things like that, but you don't really think about things like shapes or colours. So I hadn't realised that. That's really, really interesting.
Do you have a brilliant idea or innovation and just don't know how to go about protecting it, or indeed commercialising it? We are Katya, Sam and Danni, the inside voices of Pure Ideas. We are an intellectual property company based in Warwickshire, but with clients worldwide. Our team boasts nearly 100 years of combined experience in the IP field, and we pride ourselves on our approachable, friendly and no-nonsense style. Throughout our podcasts, Let's Talk Pure Ideas, we will be tackling lots of different aspects of protecting ideas, brands and innovations. We will look at everything from how to select your IP firm to discussing how best to protect your innovations and ideas and ultimately commercialising them.
Hi, welcome to our second podcast. We are looking forward to giving you an introduction to trademarks today with Danni Weirs, who's one of our resident trademark specialists. Hi, Danni.
Hello.
So, Danni, Pure Ideas deals with lots of trademark inquiries, but we often find people are confused about what a trademark is. Can you give us a sort of simple overview of what can be trademarked and some examples, perhaps?
Sure, of course. So, put simply, a trademark is an identifying sign that distinguishes your mark, so your trademark, and your goods and services that you provide from those of your competitors, so from those of others. There's lots of famous examples around that you use and that you see on a day-to-day basis. Some examples include the famous McDonald's golden arches, the Apple logo that most people have on their phones and that I can see literally around the room. Other examples include the Cadbury's Purple colour. You can have a shape mark as a trademark. For example, the Coca glass bottle is a trademark. The Duracell battery is also a shape mark. You can also have a pattern mark. So the Burberry scarf pattern is a trademark. And there's also lots of famous sounds that have been trademarks. For example, the Tarzan's yell and the beating on the chest.
Wow, that's actually really interesting, because you think immediately of things like logos and names and things like that, but you don't really think about things like shapes or colours. So I hadn't realised that. That's really, really interesting. So another area of confusion that we often have in the business, or that people have difficulty with, is the difference between a trademark search and a trademark watch. What is the difference, Danni, and when should you do a trademark search?
Yep, sure. So a trademark search, otherwise known as a clearance search, is conducted before we file a trademark. So you basically do a trademark search to see if there are any other confusingly similar or identical trademarks to your own, and then we can see if your mark is basically free and available for use and if it can be registered. Whereas a trademark watch is a service that we provide after a trademark has been filed and registered, whereby we monitor trademark registers around the world to see if there's any third-party attempts to register any confusingly similar or conflicting identical trademark applications that could be problematic to your own.
Okay. So it sounds as if a trademark search is something that actually is quite important if you're considering getting a trademark, that you really should consider searching in advance to make sure there's nobody else with that already then.
Yes, definitely, because then it can help you avoid potential problems that could come down further on down the line. Okay. So it's definitely a step that we always recommend. I mean, it is an optional step, but it's definitely a step that we always recommend conducting before applying for a trademark.
Okay. And I've heard you just say to people before, oh, your trademark is too descriptive. What exactly does that mean, and how can something be too descriptive?
Yes, this is a question that I get all the time. So one of the fundamental requirements for a trademark is that it cannot be descriptive. So a trademark cannot describe the goods and services that you'll be providing. An example I was taught is that you cannot use or try to register the word apple if you're a greengrocer, or you cannot register ice and creamy if you're going to be an ice cream parlour, because that is literally describing the goods and services that you're going to be providing. So if you try to register those examples as a trademark, you will most likely receive an absolute refusal against your application.
Which explains why apple can be used for a phone, but not if you're selling fruit and vegetables. Okay.
Exactly.
And what's relative refusal? Because that comes up as well. So what's the difference?
So you've got absolute refusal and you've got relative refusals. So absolute refusals are problems that are inherent with the application itself, and relative refusals are problems that can be raised due to earlier trademarks that exist previously that have already been filed.
Oh, right. So geographically then, that's the next step in the process that I often hear you talking about in our business. So people often say, can I get a worldwide trademark?
Oh,
and I know you often have to explain why that's not possible. Can you go through the sort of different geographies that you can use for a trademark?
Of course. So yes, I do get that question all of the time, maybe on a daily basis. So because we are a UK firm, we're based in the UK, we would usually start with a local filing in the UK, and then this filing at the UK Intellectual Property Office would cover and protect your trademark in the UK. We would then usually move on to the EU, so we could then do a regional application, which would then cover and protect your trademark in all of the European current member states. Or on the other hand, you can also have local filings in Europe. So, for example, you might choose to register your trademark only in France or in Italy if this is more beneficial to you, rather than filing in every single member state across Europe. On the other hand, there is then what is known as an international trademark. So there isn't a worldwide trademark. So there isn't a mark that automatically covers you for every single country in the world, but there is an international trademark system whereby you can file one application which covers you in over 100 countries, but you need to specifically choose and designate those specific countries. For example, the United States or Japan. On the other hand, you can also have direct filings abroad. So, for example, you could file a trademark in the United States, for example, or in China. So we could file that application for you directly in those countries themselves.
Okay, so it's quite important then, I would think, that if you're going to do it in a lot of different countries, that you're quite selective about where you choose, or it could get very expensive very quickly.
It could, yes. Obviously, international filings are a lot more expensive because of the regional scope you are looking at. It's always important to think about where you're going to be using your mark currently and in the future. So, for example, if you are producing your goods, for example, in China, we would recommend covering and applying for a trademark in China. Mm-hmm. But then if you know you're going to be moving into the United States in the next couple of years, we could also look at filing in the United States as well. So then you've got protection in all of the countries where you'll be using your mark. But yes, it can be expensive to go down the international route.
Okay. And classes are the next thing that people have to look at. What they're doing with their trademark. So it's not just geography, there's also the different classes. Can you explain, for those that don't know, what classes are and how they work?
Of course. So classes with trademarks, there is a categorization system that is used around the world. It's basically trademarks are limited and divided into 45 different classes for goods and services. So there's 45 different classes, 35 are for goods and the remaining are for services. And then we need to carefully select which classes you want your trademark to be protected in, because unfortunately your trademark is only protected for the goods and services, so the classes that you select in your application. A good example is class 25 is for clothing and for footwear and headgear. Class 9 is for software. And then for services, you've got class 43, which is for providing services for food and drink, or 45 is for providing legal services.
So choosing those classes is really quite important then. I'm assuming that, when you're considering your trademark, you really have to put quite a lot of thought into that then.
Yes, picking the right goods and services and the classes that you're going to use is very important because, like I said, your mark is only protected for those classes that are included in your application. Unfortunately, once you file an application, you cannot add classes to an application, or you cannot amend it. So if we accidentally miss a class, you would then have to file a separate application to make sure that you've covered everything that you want to have covered. It's also important to think about the goods and services that you're going to be protecting in the future. So we can also include them when filing an application. You might not be using them at the moment, but if you're thinking of broadening your horizons and using a different class or providing a little bit of a different service in the next 12 months, we can include that when filing the application.
Okay, so somebody could use a trademark for different goods and services that was very similar to your own, providing it's not the same goods and services that they're protecting. Is that right?
Yes, so you're only protected for the goods and services that you have covered. Or, for example, if the trademark is identical, and if there is a conflicting trademark that's identical in identical goods and services, then there are things that can be done. But you're only, or confusingly similar services, but you've only actually got protection for the goods and service that you're applying for. If we go back to the Apple example, if you have protection for mobile phone devices and someone else comes along with a trademark for Apple in clothing, and you haven't got protection for it, then they're completely different goods and services.
Okay. So really important to look to the future and what you want to do with your trademark then.
Definitely, yes.
Okay. So if I've identified my logo or my name and I've done my searches, I've decided on my geography and my classes, what steps are involved then to register that trademark, Danni?
So then we can draft your application and put everything together, and then we would then file the application at the relevant intellectual property office, be that in the UK or the EU or elsewhere. We then have to pay the appropriate filing fees, and then it's then over to the relevant intellectual property office, who would then examine the application, and then it would go through all of the different stages of examination and opposition periods at the relevant office up until registration.
So how long does that process tend to take then? Or is it a case of how long is a piece of string?
Very true. So at the UK at the moment, it's about 4 to 6 months on average, providing there's no issues raised during examination or no oppositions are filed. But again, it would differ if issues are raised. It's different in the EU, and it takes a lot longer, for example, in the United States or in China, for example. And then at the end of it, you would receive a shiny trademark certificate, which would then mean you're protected for your trademark.
Okay. So once I've got that shiny certificate, how long does my trademark last for? And do I have to consider anything else once I've got the trademark?
So in the UK and the majority of countries around the world, your trademark can last forever, provided you renew it every 10 years. There are also certain post-registration requirements, depending on which country you're in. So there is a non-use requirement in the United Kingdom that is after 5 years, the same for the European Union, where you have to make sure you're using your trademark for the goods and services that you have registered for. Otherwise, you could be vulnerable to a non-use cancellation action. So you need to really make sure that you are using your trademark after 5 years for what you've registered it for. In the United States, you also have to submit a declaration of use between the 5th and the 6th year after registration. So you are attesting to the fact that you are still using your trademark in the United States. So you basically need to make sure you're using your trademark after you've filed your trademark.
And we hear a lot in the press at the moment about celebrities trademarking their names and all sorts of things. Can you give us some examples of celebrities that have either been successful or unsuccessful with trademarks and why they would consider a trademark important?
Sure. So one that's been in the news recently is Emma Raducanu. After her success recently in the US, she applied for her trademark, her name, for merchandising. I think it was for clothing and cosmetics. There's other examples where the Kardashian family have applied for all of their children's names for merchandising, and Kylie has applied for her trademark for cosmetics. Beyonce and Jay-Z have also applied for their daughter's name, Blue Ivy Carter. Taylor Swift, for example, has trademarked the phrases "party like it's 1989" and "cause we never go out of style." So some of her song lyrics for merchandising. And for unsuccessful, Donald Trump was denied the phrase "you're fired" as a trademark because it was too similar to the phrase "you're hired," which is, that's a famous one. And in regards to why celebrities would think it would be important, so it also helps to protect their brand. So if they're trademarking, they're protecting their brand, and then they can use whichever mark they have decided to apply for in regards to the goods and services that they want to be using in regards to their brand, so they can expand themselves and use it to their advantage.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it gives you a real insight into how important trademarks really are to your business and protecting your commercial assets. Yes. So thank you for that, Danni. And I suppose the last question is, what happens if you do discover that someone is copying your trademark? What can you do about it?
So on the odd occasion that someone does copy or infringe on your trademark, unfortunately, there's a lot more to this question than meets the eye. So I think we're going to have to cover this in a separate podcast. So we're going to be doing this in the future. So come back for that. We're all very familiar, I think, with the recent press surrounding the Colin the Caterpillar case with Marks and Spencer's, and also the Oatly milk case. So if we're going to take a look at how these stories were handled in the press. So if you come back, we'll talk about them next time.
Danni, thank you. That's really given us an insight into the world of trademarks. If after listening to today's podcast you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Pure Ideas. We'll be very happy to give you further help. Thank you.